The envelope sat on my kitchen counter for 3 days before I opened it. Heavy cream paper with my grandfather's attorney's return address embossed in gold. I knew what it meant. I'd been dreading it since that Christmas dinner 2 weeks ago when everything fell apart. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a bank statement. My hands trembled as I read the numbers. $12.7 million. Transferred, cleared, mine. I sank to the floor, the paper slipping from my fingers. This wasn't just money. This was my grandfather choosing me over his own son, over my parents. This was a declaration of war in a family that had been quietly suffocating me my entire life. My phone exploded with messages. 43 texts from my mother. 17 missed calls from my father. Every single one dripping with rage. I'd never heard from them before. They knew, and they were coming for blood. If you've ever been the black sheep in a family that measured love in dollar signs, hit that like button right now. Subscribe, because what I'm about to tell you is how I went from being the family disappointment to the one who inherited everything and why it nearly destroyed us all. Drop a comment if you've ever had to choose between family loyalty and your own survival. This is my story, and it started long before that envelope arrived. Now let me take you back to where this really began. Growing up as Clara Vance meant living in the shadow of impossible expectations. My parents, Richard and Vivian, were social climbers who measured success in designer labels and country club memberships. They moved through Boston's elite circles like actors on a stage, always performing, always calculating their next move up the social ladder. I was their greatest disappointment. While they networked at charity galas, I went to art school. While they drove matching Mercedes, I kept my 10-year-old Honda running. While they resided in a Beacon Hill brownstone, I lived in a cramped Cambridge studio, designing homes for middle-class families who cared more about warmth than status symbols. "When will you get serious about your career?" my mother would ask at our monthly obligatory dinners, her voice sharp with disapproval. "You could be designing penthouses, not starter homes in the suburbs." My father was worse. "Your grandfather built an empire from nothing, and here you are satisfied with scraps. Frankly, it's embarrassing." The irony burned. Everything they had, everything they flaunted came from my grandfather's fortune. My father had never held a real job, just dabbled in investments funded by family money. My mother's charity work was just social climbing with better publicity. Neither had ever built anything, earned anything, or struggled for anything real. But Grandpa Silas was different. He'd grown up poor in South Boston, the son of Irish dock workers. He put himself through night school while working as a mechanic, then built a single machine shop into an industrial empire worth hundreds of millions. He believed character was forged through adversity, not inherited through blood. And he was the only person in my family who actually saw me. I remember being 8 years old in his basement workshop while my parents entertained guests upstairs. He was restoring an antique clock, his weathered hands moving with precision. "See this, Clara?" He held up a tiny brass cog. "Not fancy, not gold, nobody sees it, but without it, nothing works. Sometimes the most important pieces are the ones nobody notices." That moment stayed with me. As I grew older, the divide deepened. Every Sunday, I'd drive to his Brookline estate for dinner. We'd sit in his study talking about design integrity, what it meant to build something meaningful instead of just accumulating things. My parents saw it as calculated manipulation. "Running to see Daddy again," my mother would sneer. "So transparent, Clara. At least we're honest about what we want." She didn't understand. I never thought about money during those visits. I went because Grandpa Silas made me feel valued for who I was, not criticized for who I wasn't. Then came that Christmas. The invitation arrived in early December on thick cream paper. "Silas Vance requests your presence for Christmas dinner. 6 o'clock. Formal attire." My parents lived for moments like these, another opportunity to perform. I almost didn't go. I'd just finished a brutal renovation project in Newton, working 12-hour days. I was exhausted and dreading another evening of their theater. But Grandpa called personally. "I'd really like you there, Clara," he said, his voice unusually soft. "It's important." So I went. I arrived 15 minutes late, delayed by project issues. My simple black dress felt inadequate the moment I stepped into the grand foyer. My mother wore a crimson Valentino gown worth more than I earned in 3 months. My father's Savile Row tuxedo probably cost more than my car. "Oh, Clara finally decided to grace us with her presence," my mother announced, her voice carrying through the parlor. Too busy with your little projects to be punctual. Traffic on Route 9, I said flatly. Traffic. My father laughed. Maybe if you left that sad apartment earlier, you'd understand punctuality. I found Grandpa Silas in his wingback chair by the fireplace, watching everything with those sharp blue eyes. When our gazes met, he gave me the smallest nod. Dinner was served in the formal dining room, the four of us spread out like strangers at a business conference. The food was excellent. The atmosphere was suffocating. My parents dominated every conversation. My father bragged about investment successes funded by Grandpa's trust. My mother detailed her museum board appointment purchased with Grandpa's donation. Every story carefully crafted to prove their importance, their success, their worth. They were performing for him, desperate for approval, but manifesting it as arrogance. Grandpa Silas listened politely, nodding occasionally. But I saw the disappointment in his eyes. His son had built nothing from everything. Then, as Mrs. Chin cleared dessert plates, Grandpa stood slowly and walked to the sideboard. He returned with 3 thick manila envelopes, each labeled with our names in his distinctive handwriting. "I have Christmas gifts for you all," he announced, returning to his seat at the head of the table. He placed the envelopes in front of each of us. "A little something to start the new year right." My parents' eyes lit up with barely concealed greed. My mother actually licked her lips. I looked down at the envelope in front of me, feeling suddenly uncomfortable. This felt like a test, though I wasn't sure what kind. My father was the first to open his envelope. He pulled out what appeared to be a check, and his face went through a fascinating series of expressions. Confusion, then forced amusement, then a kind of practiced nonchalance. "Oh, Dad," he said with an exaggerated laugh. "You and your jokes. How much did you spend at the novelty shop for these fake checks?" My mother had opened hers too, and she was giggling in that high-pitched way she had after too much wine. "Silas, you're terrible. Look at these ridiculous numbers, $10 million each. You almost had us going." They were both laughing now, enjoying what they believed was an elaborate prank. They turned their checks around to show each other, comparing notes on their father's sense of humor. I opened my envelope slowly. Inside was indeed a check made out to me for $12.7 million. The paper was thick, official, drawn on Grandpa Silas's private banking account. My hands started shaking. "Aren't you going to laugh at your silly check too, Clara?" my mother asked, still giggling. But I wasn't laughing. I was looking at my grandfather, whose expression was completely serious. Our eyes locked, and in that moment I understood. This wasn't a joke. This was real. "Thank you, Grandpa," I said quietly, carefully folding the check and placing it back in the envelope. I stood up, walked around the table, and bent down to kiss his weathered cheek. "This is incredibly generous." My parents stopped laughing. The shift in atmosphere was palpable. "Oh, come on, Clara," my father said, irritation creeping into his voice. "Don't tell me you're actually falling for this gag." It's not a gag," Grandpa Silas said simply. The silence that followed was deafening. My mother was the first to recover. "What do you mean it's not a gag? Silas, these are obviously fake. Nobody gives away millions of dollars in Christmas checks." "I do," he replied, his voice calm but firm. "Those are real checks drawn on my account, signed by me. Richard Vivian, yours are for $10 million each. Clara's is for 12.7. My father's face had gone pale. "But why would you give that ungrateful little girl more than us? We're your son and daughter-in-law. We've been part of this family, supporting you for decades." "Supporting me?" Grandpa Silas's eyebrows raised. "Is that what you call it?" "Dad, this isn't funny anymore," my mother said, her voice taking on a sharp edge. "If these checks are real, then clearly there's been some mistake, some miscalculation." "No mistake," Grandpa replied. "Take them to the bank tomorrow morning. You'll see." I excused myself shortly after that, the envelope tucked safely in my coat pocket. I could feel my parents' eyes boring into my back as I left, could sense their confusion and growing anger. But I couldn't process any of it yet. I drove back to Cambridge in a daze, parked my car in the cramped lot behind my building, and climbed the 3 flights to my studio. I sat on my bed for an hour, just staring at that envelope. $12.7 million. It was more money than I'd earned in several lifetimes of designing homes. It was freedom. It was security. It was terrifying. I didn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about my parents' faces when they realized the checks were real, about what this money meant, about why Grandpa Silas had given me more than them. Around 3 in the morning, I finally pulled out my laptop and composed a careful email to my grandfather. Thank you doesn't seem adequate. I don't understand why, but I'm grateful beyond words. I promise to honor your faith in me. I hit send and tried to sleep. The next morning brought that phone call from the bank confirming the wire transfer. I was still trying to process the reality of it when my phone started ringing. My father's name appeared on the screen. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity, or maybe some lingering sense of familial obligation, made me pick up. "Clara!" My father's voice was tight with controlled fury. "What the hell did you do?" "I didn't do anything," I said honestly. "Don't lie to me. You must have manipulated him somehow. Our checks bounced, both of them. The bank said there were insufficient funds, that the accounts were frozen. But your check cleared, didn't it?" My heart was pounding. "I got a call this morning confirming the transfer." "You manipulative little bitch!" He spat, his composure completely gone now. "You've been working on him for years, poisoning him against us, haven't you? All those Sunday dinners, all that fake sweetness. You played the long game, and you played it well. But this isn't over." He hung up before I could respond. My mother called 30 seconds later. "I hope you're proud of yourself," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us, stealing our inheritance." "I didn't steal anything, Mom. I was given a gift just like you were. A gift that should have been ours. You don't deserve that money. You've never worked for anything real in your life. You play around with your little design projects while we've maintained this family's standing in the community. We've earned our place in Silas's will." "Except it wasn't a will," I said quietly. "It was a Christmas gift." "Don't you dare get clever with me!" she shrieked. "You manipulated an old man, and when this is all said and done, everyone will know exactly what kind of person you are. We're going to fight this. We're going to get lawyers. We're going to make sure you don't see a penny of money that rightfully belongs to us." She hung up too, leaving me standing in my kitchen trembling. Over the next 3 days, I received 47 phone calls, 32 text messages, and 19 emails from my parents. Each one was angrier than the last. They accused me of manipulation, of fraud, of elder abuse. They threatened legal action. They called me names I'd never heard them use before. The masks had finally come off, and underneath was nothing but raw greed and entitlement. I didn't respond to any of it. Instead, I called Liam. Liam Torres had been my friend since design school, one of those rare people who saw through all the family drama and liked me anyway. He ran a successful architectural firm in Cambridge, and we'd collaborated on several projects over the years. More importantly, he was honest, loyal, and had always been there when I needed someone to talk to. We met at a coffee shop in Harvard Square, and I told him everything. He listened without interrupting, his dark eyes serious and focused. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and let out a long whistle. "Damn, Clara, that's heavy." "I don't know what to do," I admitted. "Part of me wants to give the money back just to make all this stop." "Stop right there," Liam said firmly. "Your grandfather gave you that money for a reason. Don't let their tantrum make you doubt that." "But what if they're right? What if I did somehow manipulate him without meaning to? Did you ever ask him for money?" "Never." "Did you ever talk badly about your parents to him?" "No, I avoided talking about them at all." "Then you didn't manipulate anyone. You were just yourself, and apparently that was enough." He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Your grandfather is one of the smartest businessmen in Boston. You really think he'd be easily manipulated, or that he'd make a decision about millions of dollars without thinking it through?" "No," I admitted. "He's always been sharp as a tack." "Exactly. So maybe, just maybe, he knew exactly what he was doing. Maybe he saw who really valued him as a person versus who valued him as a bank account." Liam's words gave me strength, but they didn't stop the onslaught from my parents. The calls and messages continued. They tried guilt, anger, manipulation, and even fake sweetness. Nothing worked because I simply didn't respond. Then a week after Christmas, I received a formal invitation. Heavy cardstock, elegant printing delivered by courier. "Silas Vance requests your presence for dinner, Saturday, December 30th at 7 o'clock. Your attendance is required." The same invitation was apparently sent to my parents because my mother left me a voicemail about it. "Your grandfather has finally come to his senses," she said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. This dinner is obviously where he's going to fix this whole mess. We'll be expecting your apology, Clara, and a check. I arrived at the Brookline mansion early before my parents. Mrs. Chin let me in with a warm smile and directed me to the study where Grandpa Silas was waiting. He looked older than I remembered, more tired, but his eyes were still sharp. "Clara," he said, standing to embrace me. "Thank you for coming." "Of course, Grandpa. Are you okay? You look tired." "I'm fine, just old." He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "We need to talk before your parents arrive." I sat down, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. "I owe you an explanation," he began. "About the money, about the checks, about all of this." "You don't owe me anything," I said quickly. "Yes, I do." He leaned forward, his elbows on the desk. "Clara, I've spent the last 50 years building something from nothing. I worked myself half to death because I believed I was creating a legacy, something to pass down to my family. But somewhere along the way, I lost sight of what really matters." He paused, his fingers drumming on the leather desk pad. "Your father grew up with everything handed to him. I thought I was helping, providing for him, making his life easier than mine was. But what I actually did was rob him of the struggle that builds character. He never had to fight for anything, so he never learned to value anything. And your mother, well, she married into money and never saw any reason to look deeper than the dollar signs." "Grandpa, you don't have to—" "Let me finish," he said gently. "Then there's you. You walked away from easy money and easy connections to do something you actually cared about. You drive a car that's older than some of your clients' children. You live in an apartment that's smaller than your parents' garage. And you've never once asked me for anything." His eyes were glistening now, and I realized with shock that my grandfather was close to tears. That night at Christmas, when I gave out those checks, I was testing something. I wanted to see what each of you would do. Your parents immediately assumed it was a joke because they couldn't conceive of me giving away money without strings attached. They laughed at what they thought was a prank. But you, Clara, you thanked me. You didn't question the amount, didn't compare it to theirs, didn't laugh. You simply accepted it with grace and gratitude. "It was an incredibly generous gift," I said softly. "It wasn't a gift," he replied. "It was a test, and only you passed." Before I could respond, we heard the front door open and voices in the foyer. My parents had arrived. The next 20 minutes were among the most uncomfortable of my life. We gathered in the formal dining room, but there was no food laid out, no place settings. Instead, the long table was covered with documents. My parents swept in with all their usual grandiosity, dressed like they were attending an awards ceremony. My mother wore diamonds that caught the chandelier light. My father's cufflinks probably cost more than my rent. They barely acknowledged me, directing all their attention to Grandpa Silas. "Dad," my father began, his voice oozing false warmth. "I'm so glad you called us here. I think we all know there's been a terrible misunderstanding that needs to be cleared up." "There's been no misunderstanding," Grandpa Silas said coldly. My mother laughed nervously. "Silas, darling, of course there has been. Those checks you gave us were invalid. Surely that wasn't intentional." "It was completely intentional." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. My father's face was turning red. "Now see here, Dad, I don't know what Clara has been telling you, but—" "Clara hasn't told me anything," Grandpa Silas interrupted. "She didn't have to. I have eyes, Richard. I've been watching, for years." He stood up slowly and walked to the head of the table where a stack of folders waited. "Let me show you what I've been watching." He opened the first folder and pulled out a stack of financial statements. "This is a record of every withdrawal you've made from the trust fund I established for you 20 years ago. In 2 decades, you've withdrawn over $40 million. Do you know what you've built with that money?" My father's jaw clenched. "I've invested it. I've grown our family's portfolio." "You've spent it," Grandpa Silas corrected. "On cars, on houses, on country club memberships, on maintaining an image. Your investment portfolio is worth less today than it was a decade ago. You've created nothing, built nothing, contributed nothing." "That's not fair," my mother protested. "We've been ambassadors for this family. We've maintained your reputation in the community." "My reputation?" Grandpa Silas's voice was deadly quiet now. "I built my reputation with my hands and my mind. I didn't need ambassadors in designer dresses drinking champagne at charity events I funded." He opened another folder. "And let's talk about those charity events. This is a record of every donation made in your names. Do you know who actually wrote those checks I did? Every single one. You took credit for my generosity while contributing nothing of your own." My mother had gone pale. My father looked like he might have a stroke. "You're trying to humiliate us," my father said, his voice shaking. "In front of her." "I'm trying to show you the truth," Grandpa Silas replied. "A truth you've avoided for decades." He turned to me, then his expression softening. "Clara, would you come here, please?" I stood on trembling legs and walked to his side. He picked up another folder, this one thicker than the others. "This is for you." I opened it with shaking hands. Inside were legal documents, pages and pages of them. At the top of the first page in bold letters, transfer of trusteeship and primary beneficiary status. "What you received at Christmas was just the beginning," Grandpa Silas explained. "These documents transfer full control of my estate to you effective immediately. The trust funds, the business holdings, the real estate, everything. It's all yours now." The folder slipped from my fingers, paper scattering across the polished table. "What?" The word came out as barely a whisper. "You're the only one who never wanted it," he said simply. "Which is exactly why you're the only one who deserves it." My mother's scream cut through the room like a knife. "No, this is insane. You can't do this." She lunged toward the table, but my father caught her arm. "Dad, you're not thinking clearly," he said, trying to regain control of the situation. "This is obviously some kind of episode. We should call your doctor." "I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years," Grandpa Silas replied. "And I've already consulted with my attorneys. Everything is legal binding and irrevocable." "We'll sue," my father shouted, abandoning all pretense of civility now. "We'll take this to court. You can't cut us out like this." "You can try," Grandpa Silas said calmly. "But you'll lose. I've made sure of that." He turned his back on them and looked at me. "Clara, I need you to understand something. This isn't just money. It's responsibility. It's a test of character that will continue for the rest of your life. Can you handle that?" I was crying now, overwhelmed by everything. "I don't know." "That's the right answer," he said with a small smile. "Anyone who thinks they know is lying." My mother had collapsed into a chair, sobbing dramatically. My father was pacing like a caged animal, his face purple with rage. "You'll regret this," he spat at my grandfather. "Both of you will regret this." "I regret many things," Grandpa Silas said quietly, "but this isn't one of them." He gestured toward the door. "I think it's time for you to leave now." "We're your family," my mother wailed. "No," Grandpa Silas said, and his voice was infinitely sad. "You're my son and his wife. Family is more than blood. It's respect, it's love. It's showing up, not because of what you can get, but because of who the person is. Clara has been family. You've been relatives." My father grabbed my mother's arm and hauled her to her feet. They stumbled toward the door, but my father paused in the doorway, turning back to look at me with pure hatred in his eyes. "This isn't over," he promised. Then they were gone, and the massive house felt suddenly quiet. I stood there in the dining room surrounded by scattered papers that represented more money and power than I'd ever imagined having. My grandfather sat down heavily in his chair, looking exhausted. "I'm sorry you had to see that," he said. "Are you okay?" I asked, moving to his side. I'm fine. Or I will be." He patted my hand. "I should have done this years ago, Clara. I enabled their behavior by continuing to fund it. I kept hoping they'd change, that they'd wake up and realize what matters. But hope isn't a strategy." I started gathering the scattered papers, trying to process everything. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now you meet with Julian Thorne, my attorney. He'll explain everything in detail. The trusts, the businesses, the foundations, all of it. It's a lot to take in, but you won't be alone. Julian is excellent, and I'll be here to help guide you as long as I can." "I don't know if I can do this," I admitted. "You can," he said with certainty. "You're stronger than you know, Clara. You've been building that strength your whole life, even when no one was paying attention." That night, I drove back to Cambridge in a fog. My phone was blowing up with messages from my parents, each one more vicious than the last. I finally turned it off and sat in my apartment staring at the folder of documents that had just made me one of the wealthiest people in Massachusetts. The next few weeks were a blur of meetings with Julian Thorne, who turned out to be a sharp, efficient man in his 50s with silver hair and kind eyes. He walked me through every detail of what I'd inherited, and with each meeting the scope of it became more staggering. There were 7 trust funds, each worth millions. There were controlling shares in 3 manufacturing companies. There was a real estate portfolio that included everything from industrial warehouses to residential apartment buildings. There were charitable foundations that funded everything from arts education to food banks. And it was all mine now to manage to grow to use as I saw fit. Your grandfather has been planning this for 2 years, Julian explained during one of our meetings. He started liquidating certain assets, restructuring others, all to ensure a smooth transition when the time came. Did he know something was wrong with his health? I asked, worried. No, nothing like that. He just knew he didn't want to die with unfinished business. He wanted to make sure his legacy went to someone who would honor it, not squander it. I thought about my parents often during those weeks. Part of me felt guilty, even though I knew intellectually that I'd done nothing wrong. I hadn't asked for any of this. I hadn't schemed or manipulated. I'd simply been myself, and that had somehow been enough. But another part of me, a part that was growing stronger every day, felt a fierce kind of satisfaction. For my entire life, I'd been made to feel less than inadequate, embarrassing. Now the universe in the form of my grandfather's wisdom had validated every choice I'd made. My parents didn't give up easily. They hired lawyers and threatened lawsuits. They tried to have my grandfather declared mentally incompetent. They spread rumors through their social circles about how I'd manipulated a vulnerable old man. None of it worked. The legal documents were airtight. My grandfather's mental faculties were clearly intact, and eventually even their lawyers advised them to drop it. What they couldn't accept legally, they tried to punish socially. Word spread through Boston's elite circles about the rift in the Vance family. But something unexpected happened. Instead of people rallying around my parents, the response was muted at best. It turned out that while my parents had many acquaintances, they had few true friends. Their relationships had all been transactional based on what they could offer or who they knew. When they were no longer backed by Silas Vance's fortune and influence, those relationships evaporated like morning dew. Meanwhile, with Liam's support and Julian's guidance, I began to actually engage with my new responsibilities. I visited the manufacturing plants meeting with floor managers and workers. I reviewed the real estate holdings and started investing in improvements that would benefit the tenants. I looked at the charitable foundations and started thinking about how to expand their impact. The work was overwhelming at first, but I discovered something surprising. All those years of running my own small design business had taught me skills I didn't know I had. Budget management, client relations, project oversight, creative problem solving, it all transferred. I wasn't doing this alone either. I had a team of experienced professionals who'd been working with my grandfather for years, and they welcomed my fresh perspective. 3 months after that fateful Christmas dinner, I sat in my grandfather's study, which had become my office 2 days a week. He was in his chair by the fireplace reading the Wall Street Journal while I worked through a proposal to expand one of our scholarship programs. "You're doing well," he said without looking up from his paper. "I'm trying," I replied. "Some days I feel like I'm faking it until I make it." That's what everyone feels. The difference is that you're not too proud to ask for help when you need it. He folded his paper and looked at me. "Your parents certainly never learned that lesson." I set down my pen. "Have you heard from them at all?" "Your mother called last week, wanted to know if I'd come to my senses yet." He shook his head. "I told her the same thing I've told her every time she calls. This is final. There's no going back." "Do you miss them?" I asked quietly. He was silent for a long moment. "I miss who I hoped they might become. But no, I don't miss who they actually are." It was a sad truth, but it was the truth. 6 months after Christmas, I moved out of my studio apartment and into a modest house in Arlington. It wasn't a mansion, just a 3-bedroom colonial with good bones and a yard. I could have afforded anything, but excess for excess's sake had never appealed to me. Instead, I put my energy into making the house feel like home, filling it with art from local artists' books that I actually wanted to read, and furniture that was comfortable rather than merely impressive. I kept my design business too, though I was selective about projects now. I didn't need the money, but I needed the work. Creating beautiful functional spaces for families brought me joy in a way that board meetings and investment reviews never could. Liam visited, often helping me navigate this new world I'd inherited. He never asked for anything, never tried to capitalize on my new situation. He was just there, steady and supportive the same way he'd always been. "You know what's amazing?" he said one evening as we sat on my back porch drinking wine and watching the sunset. "You haven't changed." How could I not change? I asked. My entire life is different now. Your circumstances changed, he clarified. But you're still you, still driving that ancient Honda, still shopping at Target, still genuinely excited when you find a good deal at HomeGoods. You didn't become them. I never wanted to be them, I said. Exactly, and that's why you deserved all this. A year after the inheritance, my grandfather passed away peacefully in his sleep. He was 83, and he'd lived every one of those years fully. The funeral was enormous, attended by business leaders, politicians, workers from his factories, recipients of his charitable foundations. My parents came sitting in the back and leaving immediately after the service without speaking to anyone. In his will, my grandfather left them each $1. Not because he was petty, but because he wanted to make a point. Everything else, everything that wasn't already in my name, came to me. But more importantly, he left me a letter. Dear Clara, it read in his strong, clear handwriting. If you're reading this, I'm gone and you're probably feeling overwhelmed. Good. Being overwhelmed means you understand the weight of what you're carrying. Anyone who isn't overwhelmed by this responsibility isn't taking it seriously enough. I want you to know that I never doubted you, not for a second. From the time you were a little girl watching me fix that clock in my workshop, I saw something in you that I never saw in your father. You had curiosity, patience, and respect for the work. You understood that value comes from what you build, not from what you're given. Your parents will never forgive you for this, and I'm sorry for that burden. But Clara, you didn't take anything from them. They never had it to begin with. I was only lending it to them, hoping they'd prove themselves worthy of truly inheriting it. They never did. You owe them nothing. Not your money, not your guilt, not your time, not your energy. They made their choices, and those choices had consequences. That's not cruelty, it's reality. What you do owe is to yourself and to the legacy we build together. Use these resources wisely. Help people who need helping. Create opportunities for those who lack them. Build things that matter. And most importantly, never forget that your worth has nothing to do with the numbers in your bank account. You were worthy before the money, and you'll be worthy after it. Be brave, Clara. Be kind, and be yourself always. With all my love, Grandpa Silas. I read that letter 3 times, crying through every word. Then I folded it carefully and put it in my desk drawer where I could pull it out whenever I needed to remember why I was doing all this. Today, 2 years after that Christmas dinner that changed everything, I split my time between managing my grandfather's legacy and running my design business. I've expanded the charitable foundations, started new scholarship programs, and invested in sustainable manufacturing practices at the plants. I still live in that modest house in Arlington, still drive the same Honda, still find joy in the small, simple things that money can't buy. My parents and I haven't spoken since the funeral. They've moved to Florida, downsizing dramatically after their access to family money was cut off. I hear through the grapevine that they still tell anyone who'll listen about how I manipulated and stole from them. Let them talk. The truth isn't determined by who tells the loudest lie. I've learned so much in these 2 years. I've learned that money is just a tool, powerful but morally neutral. It amplifies who you already are. If you're generous, it makes you more generous. If you're greedy, it makes you more greedy. I've learned that family isn't always blood, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away from toxic people, even if they're related to you. Most importantly, I've learned that respect is earned through consistency, integrity, and character. My grandfather spent his entire life building something meaningful, and he entrusted it to me not because I was perfect, but because I was authentic. I showed up not for what I could get, but for who he was. And in the end, that made all the difference. So here's what I want to know from you. Have you ever been overlooked by your family? Have you ever been made to feel like you don't measure up to someone else's expectations? Have you ever had to choose between being true to yourself and keeping the peace? Drop your stories in the comments below, because I guarantee you're not alone in this. And if this story resonated with you, if it made you think about your own family dynamics or your own worth, smash that like button and subscribe to this channel. Hit the notification bell so you never miss another story about people who found their strength when the world told them they were weak. Because at the end of the day, the best revenge isn't getting even. It's living well, living authentically, and refusing to let anyone else define your value. See you in the next one.